You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 41. This podcast is dedicated to Circus. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into our world. Hey friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna, and I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. I'm super excited to bring y'all today's show. But before I do, shout out as always to my Patreons. Since hitting and surpassing my goal of $500 a month to fund the podcast, I've been brainstorming new ways to bring y'all more content, starting with an interview that will play next week, in which Jen Crane of Cirque Physio interviews me. If you want to hear that and get more behind-the-scenes stuff, go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. Even if you only give $1 a month, this episode will be available next week to all of you. Every dollar counts. So go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. My guest today is Anya of Paper Doll Militia. Aerialist, actor, and dancer, Anya holds a degree in performance for social change. Rain's aerial career began with a political circus company, Wise Fool, in New Mexico. Out of the collaborations there, the seeds for Paper Doll Militia, her visual performance company with co-founder Bebe Holms, were sown. With over 20 years of experience on stage, Rain's life's work is the integration of circus arts with other performance and movement disciplines. Rain has acted as an aerial consultant and choreographer on a number of projects, and she is also a passionate aerial arts and yoga instructor. Here's my interview with Anya. Rain, welcome to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you here on my computer.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I love listening to your podcast. I think it's great.
Oh, yay. Oh, right. You have heard some episodes. Cool.
Totally.
So you know how this goes. All right.
Totally.
Nice. So I always start by asking people to tell me or the audience about themselves in their own words.
I'm Anya, and I'm an aerialist. I work on the performance and creative side, and I'm also an instructor. And I'm the co-artistic director of Paper Doll Militia. And I run that company with my aerial life partner, Bebe Holms.
So awesome. When did you get started? You guys met in New Mexico, right?
Yeah, that's when we started Paper Doll Militia. And also I got started in New Mexico. I started in about 2003, and I was in college at the time. And I was really lucky to be in Santa Fe because at that time there weren't a lot of places to learn aerial arts. So I just kind of stumbled on Wise Fool, who is just an incredible organization, performance company. And they were running just, some basic classes in the evenings. They weren't set up as, an aerial studio, how we would think of it now. They had a few options for classes and no open training time, nothing like that. So pretty soon after I started taking classes with them, I got completely obsessed, as we all do. And I decided to audition for Cirque Media in England. And I went there for a semester. So that was kind of my big jumpstart into circus. And then I came back, worked some more with Wise Fool, took more classes, trained until I finished college. And then I went off to another professional training program, this time at NECA. So that's kind of how I got started. And in that time period is when we also formed Paper Doll Militia.
And how did you and Sarah meet?
We met through at Wise Fool. We were both there taking classes. I was actually just starting to begin to teach as well. I was assisting over at Wise Fool, and I was teaching a small class basically for my friends over at a local yoga studio in town. And she came to one of my classes, which was a creative improvisational class. And we connected right away because we were both really interested in that side of things. And then at the same time, we were working with two other performers, Colleen McEwen and Weston McDowell. So that was the original four that started Paper Doll Militia.
And you say Sarah is your aerial life partner. Did you guys decide that right off the bat? How did that happen?
Well, we all four of us came together to create a show and therefore created this company. And so we were all working in partnerships. And actually, I was working a lot with Colleen at that time on duo trapeze and duo acro. And so we were partnering in different formats for sure. But then over time, what ended up happening is, Sarah and I moved after I went to NECA, and Colleen and I were both at NECA, and she stayed for an extra residency year, and I decided to move to San Francisco. And at that time, Sarah was just coming back from her adventures in India, and she was looking for a place to root herself. And I was like, come on out to the Bay Area. It's amazing. We'll sort of like restart up the company again. And so her and I started working together more closely at that point when we were both located in Oakland. So, nice. Yeah. But like creatively, we gelled from the very beginning, and we call each other aerial life partners because it's just so much more than just aerial partners, especially because we run the business together. We're best friends. We work together. We keep each other safe in the air. And also we're family because I married her brother.
That's so crazy. So yeah. She's like your sister, like literally.
She's my sister-in-law. Yeah. So we have like family Christmas. Like we just got back from Maine. We were all together. And now she lives in Scotland. So that happened about 6 or 7 years ago, but we still run the company together. But yeah, so we get together for projects, we get together for shows, for teaching, and then we also get together for family time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How'd you come up with the name Paper Doll Militia? Where did that come from?
Everyone always asks about that.
It's such a good name. And it's so different because it doesn't have any kind of like circus or aerial like illusions in it. Most times you hear companies that have at least some gesture towards something about the work. And Paper Doll Militia could be anything. I mean, not true. Anything, but...
Yeah. No, that's true. I didn't think of it like that. Yeah, and actually, I think that's pretty reflective of our company. We do definitely use circus arts and we use aerial skills, but the company was founded as sort of like a broader performance company than that, where it's really just about utilizing the circus skills just as one of our many mediums to tell the story or create the work. But in terms of creating that name, we actually didn't come together with all these intentions of creating this performance company that was going to be, and now we're over a decade. I think we've been around now for 12 years, but we didn't set out like that. We came together, we wanted to create a show, and we were like, I guess if we're creating a show, then we need a name. So we sat together, we were all just kind of hanging out in New Mexico, drinking coffee and brainstorming names. And I think in my memory, again, this was a long time ago, it just came because we were looking for a name that got across the sense of an ensemble, but we didn't want to be, the so-and-so company or the so-and-so ensemble. And we really liked the hard edge and sort of like the darkness of the idea of like a militia. But we also have this really sort of like quirky and vintage side to our company. And so I think the paper dolls really kind of represent that side. And I really like the image of sort of like this militia of paper cutouts just standing there like all hand in hand, So I think the image just really spoke to us. And it wasn't like it was like, all right, yeah, we like it. Cool. Let's roll with it,
And now the company does so much more than just performances. You guys have retreats, you teach. What else does Paper Doll Militia do?
Yeah, well, we have two major components of the company. So we have our production side, which is our original full-scale productions. And then we have our instruction side, which essentially is the two things that you just listed. It's our teacher training program and our retreats. That's pretty much what Paper Doll Militia encompasses. As individuals, we also do, freelance instructing, specialty workshops, things like that. But that's a little bit more on our own personal time. But for the company, those are pretty much the categories.
And do you, as Rain, I'm interested in how you guys set up the business part of it. Like when you teach as Rain versus when you're with Paper Doll Militia.
Yeah, well, especially back in the day when we both used to teach more sort of ongoing studio classes, that really had to just be us as individuals because each studio has a contract with you and you sort of negotiate your own terms and it's all very individualized. And I'd say the same for traveling workshops. That was sort of the first thing that we started to do outside of just regular studio classes. And it's just such an individual thing that we sort of just kept that to our own. So if I'm traveling around the country and if I decide or I work with a studio to come in as a guest instructor, then I'm usually just doing that as Rain. And I do that through my own bookkeeping and my own promotion. Although we do have crossovers in marketing. It's not that I wouldn't announce my workshops through Paper Doll Militia. But when it comes to what our Paper Doll Militia programs are, it's really the retreats and teacher trainings. And we also have an office manager who does all of our registration for that. And all the bookkeeping goes through Paper Doll Militia and all the marketing. So it's just sort of self-contained.
And have you ever done performances or worked for any other companies other than yourself?
Yeah, I have here and there, and it's been really great and really fun. Actually, Sarah and I both worked on a show. It was a theater show, but we were aerial mermaids. It was Peter Pan, and that it was awesome. And it actually was in a circus tent, which is funny because it was not a circus show. This was the aerial mermaids were the only part of the show that had any circus element. But we traveled on that show for a year. And the great thing about it was that because we were on the show together and we really had a very simple part, it was like a 2.5 minute act that we would perform every night. And other than that, we were free to work on our own work. And we also were provided with rehearsal space or training space because we worked that into our touring contract. So we were developing one of our Paper Doll Militia shows at the same time as touring with this show.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. So and then I've done other projects, smaller projects with other artists and other companies, for sure.
Why or how is it? I mean, I think that this is a pretty obvious question, but I'm interested in hearing kind of the differences. I know, so I was thinking about this today, how so many artists, their goals are to work for a company. They want to be part of Elwaz, or they want to be part of these companies versus creating your own work in your own company.
Yeah. So creating your own work and your own company is a ton of work, so much work and so much responsibility, but it's really fulfilling if that's what drives you, if that's what you're passionate about, which I always have been. I've always just been sort of like a visionary. And for me, what keeps me going and what keeps me in this industry for as long as I have been in it and what keeps me excited and inspired is just thinking about new projects and new ideas. And not to say that you can't have that creative voice and that creative input when you're in other people's shows, but it's definitely different. I was an actor before I was a circus performer, and I know what it's like to be a performer in someone else's vision and someone else's play. And there's a script that you're going off of and someone's giving you directions. And there's definitely artistry in that, and there's definitely craft involved in that, but it's a totally different animal. So I really think it's not, a sort of better or worse thing. It's really just a preference thing of what type of artist are you? What type of artist am I?
I definitely want to talk about Warped and maybe going into this, but what type of artist are you? Like, where are your inspirations? Where do you get this kind of like whimsical sense?
Yeah, well, I've always been a very visually oriented performance artist. My dad is actually a painter, a visual artist, a graphic designer. So I grew up with that, but I don't have any drawing skills or painting skills. I'm terrible at it. But I think that design-wise, that's how my brain works. Like when I get a new idea for a show or a piece, it often starts with some kind of visual element. I also just my entire career have been really driven by the idea of mixing mediums. And so, I come from a theater background. I learned dance from a very young age. And so definitely theater and dance are a big part of what I try to do when I'm creating a new piece of performance, along with the aerial work and along with the circus work. And then I also love working with different mediums. From the very beginning of Paper Doll Militia, we always had some element of either shadow puppetry or shadow art or animation, some kind of projection element to it, which I just find really interesting. Again, it's another visual medium that can really integrate with what I'm already doing.
Let's talk about Warped. Where did it come from? What is it?
So Warped is the new Paper Doll Militia full production. And so it does have a lot of those elements that I just talked about. We have animation work. We have custom apparatus for Warped, which is super interesting. Actually, maybe in order to talk about the apparatus, I feel like I have to go back and talk about the concept first.
Yeah, for sure.
So the concept, it was conceived of by myself and Sarah, and we were actually warming up in the dressing room at Moisture Festival, and we were just kind of brainstorming, and we were like, well, what if we did a show and we were in a giant clock? And maybe that was inspired because we had just both recently read Night Circus, which is awesome. And we were like, oh, we could get a freestanding rig and it could be designed just like this giant clock. And so if we're going to make a show about a clock, well, it has to be about time. And then we started thinking about all the different aspects of time, which is endless. Like there's so many different ways you could take that theme. So it was really exciting for us. So that was kind of where the initial concept came from. Then some time passed. We tried to get funding for it. We realized that getting funding for a giant freestanding rig made to look like a clock was pretty difficult. So we kind of pared down our idea, and we thought of the concept of not having a freestanding rig, but just having all of our apparatus resemble the inner workings of a clock. And then I had this magical serendipitous meeting with Todd Spearing of Circus Gear. I ran into him at an aerial studio in Raleigh, and I didn't know who he was. And I walked into this aerial studio, and there was this incredible apparatus that these ladies were training on. And I was like, what is this thing? This is so cool. This is so interesting. And Todd's right next to me. He's like, oh yeah, this is the apparatus I designed, and I was blown away. Like, really, you designed this? This is so great. And I started telling him all about our show. And he was just listening. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I really like that idea. And then I left and I went home and I went back to LA. And like 2 weeks later, he sent me a video of a prototype that he made for an apparatus. And it was perfect. It was like, this is the apparatus that I was dreaming about without knowing what it was. So that's kind of where it all started. And then Sarah and I went to work with him in Raleigh for a week-long residency. And we stayed with him and his family for a week. And we would just go into the circus studio and play with, whatever prototype he had made for us that day. And then
oh my God, fun.
It was so fun. And we would just brainstorm and draw pictures. And then we'd come back to his house, and then he'd stay up all night welding a new prototype.
What?
I know. It was awesome. And so by the end of that week, we created all the apparatus for the show.
So it's a totally aerial-based show?
Mostly. I also did want to include a little bit more groundwork than what we usually do. We're a pretty aerially based company, but I specifically cast 2 people in LA that were a little bit more ground oriented than I personally am. Our cast is myself, Lena Alani, who is also more of an aerialist. And then Windu Sales, who's like a generalist, does a lot of floor acrobatics, has a lot of great flippity-doo-dah skills. And then Sam Aquatic, who is a contortionist and also an aerialist, and also does some partner acro with Windu. So we tried to make it a little broader, but we all use the aerial equipment. And it's not sort of designed in this, sort of like act format. It's all interactive. So the apparatus are, how to try to describe it, they're connected to one another through counterbalance systems. And so there is the possibility of like using one of these pulleys and cranks to hook up, let's say, an aerial rope. And so we do some classic aerial skills on, a rope or a fabric. But most of the show really takes place within the interaction between this counterbalance system. And also we have some other pieces that were developed for the show, which are more on the custom apparatus side, which we've just played with and we've just found material on.
Is there text? Do you talk? Like, is it a story, or would you call it more like a movement-based?
There's no text.
I've never seen any of y'all's work before.
Right.
Which I think is so weird, but yeah, I haven't.
Well, a lot of our work is really involved. And so it's not the easiest thing to just pick up and tour. We try to get our work out there as much as possible, but it's hard to get everywhere, This show is not text-based. We have done text-based shows in the past, and I was considering it for this show, but we just played with a lot of these concepts, and it sort of developed through our research and development, and we tried various things, and it just wasn't feeling like it was a text-based show. But there is definitely a plot line and a narrative, and the characters were all developed based around a lot of the concepts that we were working with and playing with in the devising process.
What are some of those concepts?
So we started with just, as I said, time is just this huge category, right? Yeah. And there's so much within it. So we started just playing with all of it, the idea of aging, of mortality, of death, of time speeding up, time slowing down, glitches in time, memories, perspective, like there's just so much, right? And so throughout a lot of those explorations, we did end up sort of focusing on this idea of the finite body versus the infinite body and how that relates to like humans' relationship to our own mortality or to the mortality of our loved ones and how that drives us. And, just looking at the whole sort of history of mankind, trying to discover and understand the mysteries of time. But for me, what was so interesting, what kept coming up in our research, is that time is still one of the biggest mysteries of our human understanding. Like we have a lot of theories about time, like, Einstein's theory of relativity is still just a theory, right? It's a thought experiment. So there's no, and they're obviously working on it in the scientific communities, and there's a lot of research that's going into it. But there's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of mystery, and there's a whole history of humans trying to understand and control time. So that's actually one of the main themes that have come up, and just kind of looking at like what happens when we try to control time, like on a day-to-day basis. That looks like us planning things and having everything scheduled from, in 15-minute increments and trying to really like create this idea of order in our lives, which many times is just an illusion. And then in the big picture scope of things, trying to understand time, like there's a history of alchemists and scientists trying to discover, the elixir of life, or how can we stave off death. So we've kind of addressed a little bit of that idea of our desire to understand / harness and control time, and how that can sometimes backfire on us.
I love that. Did you direct the show?
Yeah, I'm the director, and it's weird to say that because there's not such a clear line between what is the director. It's a devised process. So when I'm directing, I'm really just facilitating, and I'm taking all the discoveries that we make and organizing them and saying, okay, this is the direction I want to go, and then bringing it back to the table and to the cast again, and then working on it in that way. I'm also in the show, and that's really hard to direct and be in the show. So we also have worked with a lot of really wonderful guest directors or guest choreographers, people that have come in and helped us as being sort of like an outside eye in the process.
Where do you find those people?
Just through networking and through finding, talking to people. We worked with Ezra LeBanc, who's in the acrobatics community out here in Southern California. He's also a physical theater professor of movement at Long Beach. I think it's Cal State Long Beach. I hope I have that right. But yeah, so I was just recommended to him from a friend, and he was wonderful. He really helped us just kind of hone in some of our ideas. And then we also worked with a dance choreographer named Raymond. I don't know his last name. Well, I can visualize it in my head, but I don't know how to pronounce it. But yeah, he was great. And again, that was just someone I found through the community, through references.
And how do you fund these projects?
That is a great question. We, as a sort of DIY grassroots company from the very beginning, we do everything we can to just utilize like resources in the community. We have done a lot of crowdfunding. We've done fundraising events, things like that. This show actually was funded through a grant, one of the first big grants that we've received in the United States. As I mentioned earlier, Sarah moved to Scotland about 6 or 7 years ago, and the funding there is a lot more accessible. Mm-hmm. So we have had more grant opportunities over there. And this is the first time we have had a grant to this extent over here in the United States. And the grant is through National Performance Network. And it was essentially sponsored by Seven Stages in Atlanta, who's the theater that is presenting us for our debut. And they really helped us in applying for the grant. They were our lead partner, and they've supported us every step of the way. So they have been completely instrumental to this particular production and us getting enough funding to get this off the ground.
That's amazing.
Totally.
Wow,
it's
good
really
job,
amazing.
Seven Stages. I'm so happy to hear that.
They are wonderful.
I'm interested to know why you remain in the U.S. if the funding is so much better in Scotland.
Oh, I love my life here.
That's a good reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm really thankful for the time that I've had in Scotland and for the opportunities there. Like when Sarah first moved there, the first opportunity we got was a year-long residency, and they just paid us to be artists. It was amazing. I was like, what is this? They didn't even care if we had a final product. But of course, we're these American artists that are not used to getting paid. So we were like, oh my God, we have money. Let's just take this money and make a show. So that's what we did.
I mean, I would hope that like as artists, like that's what we do, right? We make stuff.
Sure. But that's also a very sort of like American way of thinking about it, because it's very product oriented. Like over here, we need something to market and something to sell. And not to say that they're not interested in making products in funded countries, but in the United States, we tend to be thinking about our art making as a product because we have to have something to sell because that's where our income comes from. Even in the art world, it's a very sort of capitalist structure. In countries where there's more funding, I feel like there's more emphasis on taking time as an artist to develop your own craft and your own artistic voice as research or just as more of a process-oriented thing. Mm-hmm. And so like specifically this residency was for that. But it was hard for us to just be process-oriented and not just want to jump straight to the product.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. But sorry, just to go back to your question about living there versus living here. So it was an amazing experience, but personally, I really do not connect to living in the UK. I've met some amazing people there, again, have had some great opportunities, but I was never happy over there. And I would get back to my home here and I would feel this sort of like weight lifted. I just got really thankful for, even if it's tough here, even if it's difficult to find funding, this is my home and I feel really good about that. I love LA. I love everything that I've built here. And so I'd rather have to beg, borrow, and steal, whatever it is, to make art. That's just my personal sort of philosophy on it. I'd rather be living where I want to live, the life that I want to live, and maybe I don't have as much access to funding, but I'm okay with that.
How much does Sarah, because you guys are your aerial life partners, does she have any creative input on Warped?
Well, yes, this was originally supposed to be a show developed by both of us. And this actually really leads into what I was just talking about is we both wanted to create work where we lived. And so the previous show, we had done a lot of traveling back and forth. Uh-huh. And as I said, I was kind of struggling with that, to be honest. Like I didn't love having to go to Scotland every time I wanted to make a show and, do it in these really short, sort of intensive bursts. I wanted to have a longer period where I could just make art in the place that I'm living. And so we had a lot of sort of structural check-ins about this new show, about, well, what's the best way to make this show where we're both going to be happy? And decided to both still work on the show, but work on it in our separate homes. So what that meant was that we were going to be developing it side by side, sharing videos, and we were both allowed to steal anything that we saw the other group do that we liked and put it into our own show.
Wait, so she was making Warped at the same time in Scotland?
Yes. And she did one development period. And then what ended up happening is because of a few different reasons, one sort of being the way that the funding works there, it sort of pushed the project off a little bit further. And then also she's really been focusing on her one-woman show lately, Egg. So she's still working on Warped, but the timelines are different now. So she'll be going back to that show a little bit later, whereas we're already debuting it this February. So it ended up not working out exactly the way that we thought, but it's interesting because now it's sort of like we both have the same apparatus, the same sort of seed of a concept, and we get to just take it in whatever direction we see it going in. And so her version of Warped is probably going to be very different. And actually, now that things have sort of shifted from our original idea, she might end up changing the name just so it's not confusing, but just sort of branching off from similar concepts.
What a cool way to create work. Like a non-collaboration almost.
Yeah, and it started as a collaboration because we went and did that apparatus residency together, and we brainstormed a lot in the pre-production phase. But it's, just the way that things ended up. It's been an interesting exercise in different structures and different models of collaboration.
Do you consider Paper Doll Militia a circus company?
That is such a good question. No, I don't.
Cool.
That's just because I think it would only describe one aspect of what we do. And it's not sort of all encompassing. I struggle for the terminology of what genre we are, but I think, so at first we called ourselves aerial theater for many years. And then I sort of felt like, oh, you know what? As contemporary circus is evolving and growing, I can totally see us fitting into the contemporary circus genre.
Sure.
And then, right? But then I was like, oh, but we're very visual. And contemporary circus these days actually is quite minimal. So then I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, we got invited to take part in the Manipulate Visual Theatre Festival in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I didn't even know visual theater was a genre, but it is. And we were in this festival, we've done it a few years now, and it encompasses so many different visual mediums. So, puppetry, animation, dance, movement, physical theater, and even circus. So that's what I would say my favorite genre name would be for our company, visual theater.
Visual theater.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So you have Warped. You have all these apparatuses, which are in LA.
Yes.
And you're performing in Atlanta because they got you the grant. How are you getting everything across the country?
We're packing it in a cargo van and driving it across.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll be teaching workshops along the way. I'll be in Flagstaff and Santa Fe and Dallas.
Dallas is a great town.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. You've spent time there, huh?
Yeah, for sure. Dallas is a good town. I'm trying to think if I have any other questions about Warped that I want to know that are burning.
I'm trying to think if I covered all the different aspects. So there's the apparatus, there's the concepts, the people in the show.
How you got funded.
Yeah.
I think that's an important one. I think that, I don't know, there are so many, and I see more and more, mostly aerial because it's a world I kind of teach and navigate. But more people are doing these performance arts as hobbies, but I'm not seeing the results in a lot of companies forming or a lot of shows or people like Paper Doll Militia or Acrobatic Conundrum who are making this kind of work.
Yeah, because I think...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think it's because, especially in this country, it is very hard to get funded. And that's difficult. The ideal would be that we can make money from the art form itself. And because of this particular grant, I have been able to pay my performers, and I feel very blessed to be able to do that. But even what I'm able to pay them is not what they should be making. And it's not enough to make these types of shows. So it is a big challenge, especially in the United States, for sure.
And how do you think we could resolve that? Maybe I won't put that in there.
Well, no, I think I think that it all comes down to what our culture values. And I think that just as society changes and as our world changes, I get a little bit sad because I feel that the overall value of live theater is dwindling. I think, we have so much stimulation from screens. And, I love a good Netflix series and I love a good film for sure. But I think that people are not going out and seeing live theater or live dance or live performance as much as they used to. And to me, that's the first thing to fix, because once people support and value this in our society, then the money will come. And I know that's such a huge, vague thing. And it's well, how do we actually do that? But I just try to be an advocate for live performance. And I try to see live theater whenever I can. And that's how I can, have my small input.
I think that's right. I also think that live performance or performance troupes, I think it's there is still theater, but it's also changing into these weird, experiential kind of realms. I think about my friends who are actors who work in, what are they called? The puzzles that you go into break rooms, escape rooms. Or, people who do in festivals who are paid to do these kind of character acting. There's so many different ways that it's being used now.
For sure. Yeah. And I think all of that is great. And I think with aerial arts, there's a lot of growth, as you said, in many aspects of it, but not necessarily in the performance companies or in these full shows. But I think what you're talking about also kind of fits more into that entertainment category, even if it's interactive. It's we want to go out and be entertained rather than, the difference between entertainment and fine arts. And again, there's a place for both of those, I think. And I think even within fine art, there's aspects of entertainment. But where I see a lot of our industry moving towards, or where I see more of the growth, is definitely on the entertainment side.
That's such an interesting distinction.
Yeah, and they exist within different, in a way, like different industries even, like sort of different models. And there's more money for the entertainment side of things. I'm sure, any sort of working aerialist will know that if they get a corporate job, they can make much more than if they get hired by their local theater.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Who are some of your inspirations artistically?
Oh, first person that comes to mind, and also just from very early on in my explorations with this work, is James Thierry. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he's the great grandson of Charlie Chaplin. He has put out some. Do you know his work? Have you seen any of his videos?
I haven't seen any. Oh, I haven't seen it live. I know he was at BAM a couple of years ago, and I really wanted to see it, but I didn't get to see it. I've seen some videos.
You saw videos? Yeah. I've seen him live once. It was magical. But then I've obviously just kept up with his videos as well. But yeah, he's definitely a major inspiration. And then I take a lot of inspiration from different art forms, actually. I definitely have people within the circus industry that I look up to and that I've been very inspired by. But I also am always looking at, galleries and, who's that guy? Oh, Alexander McQueen, like all of his amazing, bizarre couture fashion, So I take a lot of inspiration also from different art forms.
Well, we're almost at time for this interview, but I wanted to ask you, before I ask my final question, is there anything else that you wanted to add about Warped?
Actually, yeah, I think, so we were talking a little bit about process and how sometimes as an artist you can be more process oriented versus more product oriented. Yeah. And I was thinking about also just my preferred way of working. So one of my major intentions when we started working on Warped was to take my time with it. So it's really great because the show's all about time, right? And and I noticed how many times we would be in the process where it would feel like, oh, well, we just don't have time, so we have to do it this way. Or, where time became such an important, almost like another member of the cast, right? It's like, how much time dictates what we do. So I made it a really clear intention to allow a long research and development period, which again, I think is not as common in this country because it's harder financially to do that. But in doing that, I loved it. And so what I found was my ideal process is letting things sit for a while and simmer. And that's where I get these sort of like bursts of inspiration, is when I have time in between, let's say I have a rehearsal and then I have a week to think about it and dream about it and gather new materials and get myself ready for the next rehearsal, as opposed to, every day.
That's so interesting. So you would schedule rehearsals like once a week for like 3 months rather than like a 1 week or a 1 month, like everyday chunk.
Exactly. Well, those were the structures that I was playing with. So what ended up happening was we actually had, I want to say, 10 months of once a week rehearsals. Wow. With some breaks in there, because definitely there were times where one of us would be out of town for a chunk and things like that. But overall, a pretty spaced out process. And that worked really well for the research phase. But then once we started to get into setting choreography or setting blocking or just really starting to rehearse it more, it worked against us, because in that week we would forget everything. Sure, and we couldn't build on anything. So then we started doing these chunks of rehearsals that were more compressed, and that worked really well for that next phase. So this has been really helpful for me in recognizing, okay, my favorite way of making work so far is phase 1, research and development, super long, drawn out, spaced out, time to dream, time to explore, and just really like let it sink in. And then then shorten up and compress and do like residencies. So we did 3-week intensives and then a break and then another 3-week intensive.
And that is so rare to have like the same cast and be able to get that kind of commitment out of people for 10 months once a week. Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one great thing about living in LA is that everyone in this cast, we are all professional performers and we are freelancers. And so our schedules are flexible to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. Not to say that scheduling is not hard. Like scheduling definitely is always a challenge. But, you know, it's much easier when this is your full-time work.
Yeah.
And people have that commitment.
Well, Rain, thanks so much for coming on. My last question is, what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Oh, yeah. I wish I prepared an answer for this. Because I really don't know.
I mean, you could take a mulligan and be like, I wouldn't tell myself anything. I'm doing it.
I mean, honestly, I feel like everything worked out for me the way, like I wouldn't change anything because I love sort of like the way that everything just threw me in a direction and I love the direction it took me. But what I would say, I think the reason why I think things worked out for me the way that they did is because I just kept following my bliss. I mean, I know that sounds really cheesy, but like I just found what I enjoyed. Like, you know, some people, they don't enjoy teaching, right? And I love it. I'm very passionate about it. So I went with that. For example, I don't love gigging. Mm-hmm. And so I've done gigs, you know, and I've put energy into it here and there, but I realized that it wasn't fulfilling me. So I dropped that and I don't put energy into that anymore. So I think for me over time, it's just about carving your own way and doing that in a way where you're really paying attention to, you know, like what fulfills you and what drives you and just following that. And I do feel like that doing that has led me in a direction where, you know, I love where I've landed. I get to live this life where I can create art and I can do what inspires me and I can make a living and I work really hard, but I love the work that I do, you know? So I guess, I don't know. Is that advice?
I don't know if it's advice, but it's really nice to hear. And I think it's important for people to hear that, that you can do what you love and make money at it and have a sustainable life doing it.
Yeah, I think you definitely can. You just have to believe it and work hard.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, Rain.
Thanks for having me.
Yay. That was my interview with Rain Anya. I'm so thankful for Rain for coming on the podcast today. In case you haven't already figured out, one of my major missions with this podcast is to help smaller companies and individual performers who need a platform or a voice to talk about their work and their upcoming work, and provide a place for them to do that. So it was super fun to get the opportunity to do that for Rain and Paper Doll Militia. The reason that I think it's important for artists to support each other and create platforms for each other is because, especially in the US, Rain and I talked about how there's always this issue of funding. There's always this emphasis on creating products because we have to. We have to create things that we sell or things that make money because our government and our culture is not structured and set up in a way that we value artists making art without any kind of sense of obligation. Now, in some ways, I kind of think that it makes sense, right? Like, if you're an artist, you should be producing work. You can't just get paid to live. But on the other hand, it takes time. As Rain said, it takes time to dig deep and to explore some of the issues and some of the thoughts and some of the feelings that we have and find ways to process that and express that to the world. And so I think that the discussion we got in about art as entertainment versus art as, or performance as fine art is a really interesting one. And one moving forward as you all go out to become or are artists creating work, you might want to consider. Which way do you lean more? And how can you set up a life in a way that helps support your dreams and your goals? As Rain said, it is possible, but the way that you do it requires time and hard work and organization. If you are in or around the Atlanta area, and I know many of my listeners are because it's my hometown, so hi Mom, go see the show, you all can check out Warped. It's playing at 7 Stages in Little Five Points this Thursday, that's February 21st, through Sunday, February 24th. Tickets are available online at 7stages.org, and I'll put a link to those in the show notes as well. You can follow Paper Doll Militia on Instagram at Paper Doll Militia and online at www.paperdollmilitia.com. I'm also going to throw a link in the show notes to James Thierry. His work is one that Rain referenced, and I think he's a very important figure for this audience to be introduced to. For more aerial training tips and inspiration and new information about my online course, you can go to theartistathlete.com or follow me on Instagram at _artist_athlete. And as always, if you want to support the podcast and Artists Making Art, you can go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. Thanks so much for tuning in, friends, fans, and enemies. I will talk at you next week. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi, I'm Katie Betts, and I'm the director of Shared Culture Concepts, which is a full-service marketing company for circus and performing arts. You can visit our website at www.sharedcultureconcepts.com. On the website, you can find a copy of our ebook, which covers basics of marketing, specifically for circus educators, coaches, studio owners, and circus artists.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast. Straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So, if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and ropes by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.